I just wanted to start out a little bit by asking, how many of you are sonographers in an inpatient facility? And how many of you are like in the direct leadership position? And how many of you are medical staff, medical directors, people? So you're actively running a lab. And and what about hospital administrators? Not too many. I was hoping we would have more because a lot of my talk is going to be like, okay, the preaching to the choir. But here we go. I think I will talk about several issues Jeff mentioned. I don't have any conflicts, no disclosures. When I'm talking about structure in an echo lab, I think that's the foundation of doing things the right way, making sure everything's in place. And although there are more recent examples, I like to start out with this Dimensions of Care framework that Pamela Douglas published in 2006 when we first started looking at quality, really. And this diagram was actually modified by me a little bit since I worked with her in a number of areas in this over the years. But just to give you a framework, John Dent's going to talk about technical quality. We can't all cover this in one area. Susan Waggers is going to talk about training because the mind power behind the doctors in the lab is very important to making sure everything works in unison. And analysis and reporting, I'm going to leave more to Alan Klein, huge area for efficiency gains. And I'm going to really just talk about a potpourri of things that I hope I can kind of stab through here, borrowing a little bit from Alan Klein's talk that I heard several years ago about what a complex environment the hospital is and the echo lab. And to get all this work done, we have to have a team concept. You really need to cultivate that in your institution. And I'm going to go over some of these things. Where are we playing this game of doing of decreasing low value care? And where are we playing is where I'm going to start. And this may look familiar to some of you. When we look at the institution that we're practicing within, these sometimes are historical places. And this really reflects the way my facility is. And it's grown up over time, where back in the 80s, a little echo lab, maybe even in a closet with one tech and one reviewer was set up. And it kind of grew stingily over the years. And before you know it, it's, the millennium and, further, and we've got techs running all over the place. Now, what if you're in a totally connected facility? I think it's really helpful to diagram your facility and identify obstacles to workflow. We don't all work in the same environments, and productivity benchmarks may differ hugely. And I'm going to talk about that later. Now, what if you're lucky enough to be in a historical medical society? Who lives in an old, dated facility that day to day? Yeah, and like a brand new one that's totally wired with all new machines. So varies, a lot of variability, and some are in between. And if you're you're kind of in that situation on the left, there's some efficiency things that can be done. Patient transportation can be a huge issue. If you're waiting in the lab, then you're going to have to go out and do all those portable, but that comes at the cost of not having an echo bed, and your staff's going to be waiting on elevators. And if you don't have machines that are new enough and they can't transmit wirelessly, or you're not wired, they have to come back to the lab every time and download a study. This can be incredible time sink. And if your hospital is benchmarking you against another facility, or the Cleveland Clinic or somewhere like that, or Texas Children's Hospital is a good example of ground up, totally wired, everything new, then you're going to have delays and decreased value. And if if you have to go back and repeat something, that's huge. Solutions can be better new equipment. Sonographers should be very autonomous in doing their work, selecting things, and being able to do things out there. And that's where sonographer training and value comes in. And that's where you're dead if you have sonographer turnover or everybody in your lab's new. We've looked at maybe having satellite labs in certain parts of the hospital where we know there are going to be high volumes of studies, but we don't want to do all that transport. Just have the tech go. We've built out an echo lab, and examples are Advanced Heart Failure Clinic. if you've got this problem too, administration has to understand that if you're waiting on patients, you just have to bite the bullet and support patient transport. The other option is the wrecking ball. These hospitals aren't going to survive in this environment of huge turnover. This is one of our dated facilities right off of where our echo lab, the building's from 1954, and it's just kind of funny, only the fellows never age. Our equipment gets better. This is Mr. Hernandez, one of our techs, over the years, he's still working there. But so then what are we playing? Who's on our team and what are our tools? This is huge. I think it can be very helpful for a lab to say, write down on a piece of paper, what are we doing? Because these things get layered on over the years, and are we really supporting it? And, there are other things besides just doing protocols that the lab may be responsible for. And if your hospital really wants to take on TAVR, advanced heart failure, Center of Excellence for Valve Disease, are they really supporting it? Because these are your staff that you need. Diagram it. Can you put a name to all of these patients? And then do you have physicians that are competent in doing the protocols that are needed to accomplish these tasks? And are the sonographers' abilities matched to the equipment they're dealing with? And do you even know their names? And, there may be certain physicians that are more in the lab to read congenital studies. Some are excellent at stress. But you have this coverage available when you've got the study schedule. And, oh, yeah, we forgot that we should really be interacting with our administrators. We're really dependent on admitting, scheduling, receptionists, IT support, biomedical support. These are areas where you can wait and productivity can be really slow. So it's nice to just kind of look at all these things, make an analysis of where you are. And I think it's important for hospital and administrators just to realize that we're not just a closet with an echo machine in it. It's gotten very complex, and in a short period of time, and maybe not at a hospital that they've been working at before. These are your fleet of machines, and so there are issues here. How old are they? Do they do the things that you need to do that you're claiming that you're going to do, matched to your protocols? And I found this very lacking over time. Like, we don't even have a list of all our machines, how old they are, what's their downtime, repair history, our machines matched to what they're supposed to do. You can have some that don't cost as much. You're going to do portables or follow-up exams versus, you may need some state-of-the-art machine, and some of it may be stuck in the cath lab or the OR. So what are the rules? I'm going to fly over appropriate use here, basically. The assumption is that low-value care may be minimized if we are mostly performing the right exam on the right patients who will benefit at the right time. Those things all have to be together. And I was lucky enough to work on the original appropriate use guidelines and learned very clearly that, and this second iteration, that it was hard for people to practice, quote unquote, according to the guidelines, because in this case, this was the redo of the second appropriate use document, and we had to map clinical indications where echo was recommended in 11 separate guidelines that spanned all the way from 2000 and over a decade. Okay, and so then these were incorporated into clinical scenarios matched to echo, where these were more user-friendly. And so with common clinical scenarios, what were appropriate, maybe appropriate or rarely appropriate indications, it was assumed that the exams are performed after a clinician and medical history. A clinician has performed a medical history and a physical exam, and that the lab is qualified to do the work. And with these initial appropriate use guidelines, it was possible to show that, especially in the outpatient environment, there was some overuse, and that was one of the indications for the initial guidelines. And this is a nice review by Parker Ward showing that really over the years, use of echocardiography did go down. It made a major impact. But what's happened now is the realization that real clinical encounters happen to a clinician, and they don't want to weed through multiple modality-specific guidelines to figure out what to do. It just is. been superseded by the new multimodality appropriate use guidelines for valvular heart disease, stable ischemic heart disease, and non-valvular disease. So these are the current go-to documents. These ones very recent. Now, I think what you'll see by just kind of going through these, it's hard to find out when an echo is not indicated. and I'm just going to go fast forward. These are the evidence, these are the clinical scenarios in the valvular heart disease section. And this is echo, column, T, rate of ventriculogram, CT, MR. So everything that's green is when an echo may be appropriate. All of these things, initial evaluation, no symptoms, follow-up, no symptoms, post-op repair, initial evaluation. I think you should become familiar with these documents. There's a lot of indications for T, so the challenge is when is a T not needed in valvular heart disease? And I think you could probably work with this phrase right here, mild disease with frequent follow-up, with no change in symptoms. Now the new document includes indications for cardiac structure and function for non-valvular, and this covers a huge area where echocardiograms are used every day, and we feel uncomfortable taking care of a patient or discharging a symptomatic patient from the hospital unless they've had an echocardiogram in some instances. A lot of different structural heart diseases, and again, just looking at the table, everything's green, okay? So these are actually, these first four columns are all echo. Stress, T, surface, stress, and strain imaging indications. And the other imaging modalities do play a role. We need to know when to select those and use them, especially for complementary imaging. Here's another table. I think this is a little crazy in my personal opinion. But validation studies might be useful here, that if you get an echo and everybody that has possible TIA, it might be a problem in today's world. Now, these are where TEs may be, surface echoes there may be some low-hanging fruit here in stable outpatients with routine follow-ups. There's some red here that we can work with to lower our numbers of studies. So patients that are in the hospital have symptoms and a lot of comorbidities, and they're elderly. It's really an area where it can be very challenging to lower the number of echoes. And one strategy that I like to think about is using this comprehensive exam for an initial evaluation, and then only if there's a change in a phase of care. The patient comes in, there's a lot of MR and heart failure, they get a mitral valve replacement, they may need another comprehensive echo after that, but then the next one may be a very limited one, so really encouraging when a limited or follow-up exam might be indicated. The fly in the ointment is you can't often tell what's going on with the patient by reviewing the electronic health record. The information's not necessarily there. People are moving at light speed and copying and paste, so this is a challenge. I think it can help also in your lab to just structure when the ordering status. So we have like a green thing. If everything's on red, like everything's been ordered stat, that means it has to be done immediately, then we've probably got a staffing problem. I'm going to just blow through this a little bit because I want you to see how we encountered this problem that Jeff alluded to. It turned out that our administration was very worried about an increased length of stay and linked this to increased echo turnaround times. They noticed that our staff productivity was below their benchmark, which was their new community hospitals with all new equipment, and too many echoes were being ordered in their opinion. So they kind of allowed some maternity leave without replacing that patient, and we found ourselves in this other problem that we were getting really behind. And so we actually did a very granular analysis of our patients over 9 days, 300 studies that spanned 2 weekends, one a holiday weekend, and I personally looked at the work order sheet and the electronic health record, and we recorded with our lab director the order status. We assigned an acuity score on the patient, and then we looked at order to scan time, scan to report time, and order to report time total in all of these patients. And this is what our acuity score looked like. A 1 would be that patient that maybe we can send them home without an echo, and then it goes up from there based on patient factors. And this is my data sheet. So the exam complexity was a 1 if it was a comprehensive exam. If we had to do contrast, a tamponade assessment, multi-valve, that added a 0.5 for each one. And if it was a limited exam, we got a 0.75. And we found out that on average, our techs were doing 1.25 studies, and that's with the limiteds factored in. And with these comorbidities, our time to order, we found this very interesting finding. Our patients were as sick as can be. These are sort of patients we're dealing with, lots of VAD, strokes, sepsis, etc. When we looked at the order acuity status, 30% of our studies were ordered stat during this time period where we had fallen off on our staffing. And so that's a huge patient safety issue. It's sort of a canary in the mine, I think, because not only were all these stats very high acuity, even in our patients where we had an ASAP or a routine stat, we found a bunch of patients with very critical results that had been waiting around. And we also found that we had 0 studies that were not indicated. I was actually pretty surprised at that. And so these are graphs of these are the actual individual patients. So I think this is very telling how we can see how long some patients had to wait. And although even we were doing pretty good work turning around our stats, we weren't where we wanted to be, but that was at the sacrifice of our non-stats. So our average of 37 hours to get a study done inpatient, and some of those had very acute results. Okay? And then the good news is we found out all this stuff that was really horrible, 30% stats, et cetera, but our hospital designed an echo dashboard that we look at now on a daily basis and put these same metrics in there, and now we have 5% stat exams, and we can kind of tell when we're going in the wrong direction. And we did this with some very targeted, needed staffing changes that weren't huge, but I guarantee when they assess our length of stay, it'll be much better. And I'm out of time. I think there's a lot of territory here. I think that one thing is the stats. We've implemented a protocol for what is a definition of a stat. It's a patient in shock. This is huge, and Alan's going to be talking about that and artificial intelligence. So lab turnover is horrible. You might want to look at these offline. And with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.